Ladies and gentlemen, there are days when heaven leans close to whisper something sacred to your spirit, and when God speaks, the calendar trembles. November 3rd is not just another date, it is a divine appointment. I woke up with a knowing in my soul, this will not be a normal day. Because when God marks a day, miracles move, hearts awaken, and destinies shift. So open your heart, because today heaven has something to say. Listen when God speaks, his timing is never ordinary. There are moments in life when everything seems still, yet something unseen begins to stir. You can feel it deep within your chest, like the gentle hum of creation itself, trying to get your attention. That is the moment when God begins to speak, not always in thunder, not always in signs written across the sky, but in the quiet places of your spirit, in the pauses between your thoughts, in the tears you hide from the world, in the sigh you release when you think no one's watching. God's voice doesn't always come as sound, it comes as knowing. It comes as peace that interrupts your panic, as clarity that cuts through confusion, as courage that arrives when logic says it shouldn't. When you learn to listen to that voice, you stop living by the clock and start living by divine timing. You begin to realize that nothing in your journey has been random. The delays, the detours, the disappointments, each was a message, not a mistake. God has a rhythm, and his rhythm is not rushed. His timing doesn't bend to our impatience because he's not just preparing the blessing, he's preparing you to hold it. When he says, wait, it's not punishment, it's protection. When he says, not yet, it's because something greater is aligning behind the scenes. Every closed door is an act of mercy. Every slow season is a divine classroom. Every quiet moment is God shaping your spirit to match the size of your destiny. We often expect God's voice to fit our plans, but the truth is, his timing rarely agrees with our schedules. You might think you're ready, but God knows readiness is more than desire. It's about alignment. You can't receive a harvest if the soil of your heart is still hardened by doubt. You can't handle a promise if your hands are still full of fear. That's why God speaks before he moves. His word comes first to prepare your faith for what your eyes cannot yet see. He will whisper something into your spirit long before it makes sense. He will give you peace about a path that hasn't yet opened. He will nudge you toward people who don't look like your destiny, but hold the key to it. That's how divine timing works. It unfolds in mystery, but ends in perfect order. To listen when God speaks is to honor the unseen. It's to say, even if I can't trace it, I'll trust it. It's to lean into a wisdom that transcends reason. You might not understand why the job didn't come through, why the person walked away, why the storm lasted so long. But if you truly believe that God's timing is never ordinary, you'll stop asking why and start asking what. What are you trying to teach me here? What are you preparing me for? Because nothing God allows is wasted. Even in silence, he is speaking through the situation. Even in waiting, he is working through the waiting. Sometimes God speaks by stopping you. You think you're losing ground, but he's really protecting your steps. You think you're being delayed, but he's really detouring you from danger. You think the opportunity slipped away, but he's saving you from settling for less. His no is not rejection, it's redirection. His wait is not denial, it's divine preparation. But to hear that, you must quiet your soul. You must learn to listen beyond the noise of fear, beyond the opinions of others, beyond the chaos of your own expectations. God doesn't compete with noise, he waits for silence. That's why he sometimes isolates you not to punish, but to position you. Because in stillness, his voice grows louder. There's a sacred strength in listening. It's not passive, it's powerful. It's the strength to resist the urge to move before you're led, The strength to trust that divine timing doesn't miss appointments. The strength to stay when your flesh says go, to wait when your mind says rush, to believe when everything around you says break. Listening is faith in motion. It's the posture of surrender. It's saying, God, I may not know when or how, but I trust that you do. And when you truly start listening, you'll begin to notice patterns. You'll realize that God never lets a word fall without purpose. Every time he speaks, it's to set something in motion. Sometimes he speaks a promise, and the test follows not to break you, but to build your faith strong enough to carry that promise. Sometimes he speaks through pain, not because he wants you to suffer, but because pain removes distractions. Pain clears the path for purpose. Pain silences pride and tunes your ear to grace. And when your ear becomes sensitive to grace, you can hear what others miss. You can feel divine movement in moments that look ordinary. That's the mystery of God's timing. It often hides in simplicity. He can use a casual conversation to confirm your calling. He can use a disappointment to direct your destiny. He can use an ordinary sunrise to tell you that a new season has begun. You may think it's just another day, but heaven may be preparing to unfold something eternal through it. When you live in tune with God's timing, every breath becomes sacred. Every step becomes significant. Every pause becomes purposeful. Listening to God means trusting that He is never late, even when He feels silent. His silence is not absence, it's alignment. He's aligning people, places, and purposes in ways your eyes cannot yet see. Like a composer tuning instruments before the symphony begins, God ensures everything is in perfect pitch before the music starts. You might be waiting for the song to play, but He's still fine-tuning the harmony. And when He finally says now, everything will sound exactly as it was meant to. Powerful, beautiful, divine. If you rush ahead of His timing, you'll end up carrying what He meant to carry for you. You'll step into things unprepared, and they'll crumble under pressure. But when you move in His timing, even the impossible becomes effortless. Doors open without you knocking. Opportunities find you without you chasing. Peace follows you because you're walking in sync with purpose. That's what happens when you listen before you move, when you let His voice set the pace instead of your impatience. God's timing teaches humility. It reminds you that control is an illusion and surrender is the only way to peace. It teaches you to depend, to wait, to listen not as a sign of weakness, but as proof of faith. It teaches you that listening is an act of love, because to listen is to care, to honor, to believe that what He says matters more than what the world shouts. So, when you feel the stirring of something divine, don't dismiss it. When your spirit feels restless for no reason, when your peace feels like it's pointing you somewhere unfamiliar, when your heart whispers something your mind can't yet explain, pause. Don't rush to act, don't rush to speak, just listen, because that's often when God is trying to get your attention. His timing might not match your plan, but it will always match your purpose. He doesn't move fast, He moves right. And when He speaks, even a single word can shift your entire direction. There will be times when the world tells you to hurry, but your spirit says wait. Honor that voice. That's divine timing at work. When the opportunity seems too good but your peace feels unsettled, trust the unease, it's God's protection. When everything feels delayed but your faith still feels anchored, that's not stagnation, it's God's preparation. His voice is not in the earthquake, not in the fire, not in the storm. It's in the still, small whisper. But you can only hear it when you choose to listen, when you trust that even silence has sound in the presence of God. God's timing may not make sense now, but one day it will reveal why every moment unfolded the way it did. Every delay will turn out to be direction. Every not yet will reveal what you weren't ready for then but were destined for later. Every unanswered prayer will echo back as divine wisdom, and you'll look back and realize he was never late. He was always on time, always speaking, always guiding, always aligning your life with something greater than you could have ever planned. Because his timing is not measured in minutes, it's measured in miracles. And miracles don't operate on clocks, they operate on faith. When you listen to God, you stop measuring your life by how fast things happen and start measuring it by how faithfully you're walking. You realize that waiting with God is better than arriving without Him. And you begin to live with quiet confidence, knowing that even when you can't hear Him clearly, He's still speaking through every circumstance, through every breath, through every heartbeat that still believes in something beyond the visible. Listen when God speaks, because His timing is never ordinary. It is holy, it is intentional, and it is always right on time. Expect divine interruptions. Miracles rarely fit schedules. Life has a rhythm we try to control. We build plans, set alarms, create to-do lists, and map out our days as if every hour is a promise. But God, in His infinite wisdom, often interrupts what we think is certain. He steps into our schedules not to destroy them, but to divine them. He moves through the moments we call inconvenient and turns them into encounters that change everything. A divine interruption is not chaos, it is choreography. It's heaven rearranging the order of your day so your destiny can align with purpose. You might call it disruption, but God calls it direction. You might think it's delay, but heaven calls it design. When you walk with God, you must understand that not everything sacred will be scheduled. Sometimes the blessing you prayed for won't arrive through the door you were watching. Sometimes the miracle you're waiting for won't follow the calendar you set. God doesn't move according to your timing, He moves according to truth. And His truth has a way of colliding with our comfort. That collision is what we call a divine interruption. It's the moment when your logic pauses, your plans crumble, and your faith is forced to rise. It's when you realize that God doesn't fit inside your agenda. He writes His own. You may wake up thinking it's an ordinary morning, but heaven might already have your name written next to a miracle. The call you didn't expect, the encounter that seems random, the detour that feels frustrating, all of it may be a setup for something sacred. Divine interruptions don't announce themselves politely. They show up disguised as inconvenience. The delay that made you late might have saved your life. The opportunity that closed might have spared you from misalignment. The relationship that ended might have freed you for something divine. God's interruptions are not always gentle, but they are always good. Every time God interrupts your plan, it's because He's protecting His purpose in you. He sees what's ahead when you only see what's near. He knows what's necessary when you only know what's comfortable. And so, He steps in. He shifts. He removes. He redirects. Not because He's cruel, but because He's calling you to something higher than convenience, to obedience. Divine interruptions demand surrender. They teach you that faith isn't just believing when things make sense. It's trusting when everything shifts suddenly and you're no longer in control. There are times when you will cry over closed doors, unaware that God's mercy is on the other side of that closure. There will be seasons when your plans fall apart in front of you and all you can see is disappointment, but in heaven's book, that was the moment your story began to change for the better. Sometimes God stops what you're doing to start what He's been planning. Sometimes He interrupts your comfort to introduce your calling. Because destiny rarely knocks on the door of convenience. It usually bursts through the walls of what you thought was ordinary. When you study the moments of transformation in life, you'll see they almost always begin with an interruption. Moses was tending sheep when a bush began to burn. Mary was preparing for marriage when an angel interrupted her plans. Saul was on the road to persecute when a light stopped him cold. None of them expected it. None of them planned it. But those interruptions became divine intersections, the meeting place between heaven's purpose and human routine. When God interrupts, it's because eternity is trying to enter time. It's not a mistake. It's a miracle in motion. The problem is that we often resist what we don't recognize. We call it a setback when it's really a setup. We call it trouble when it's really transition. We call it confusion when it's actually correction. Divine interruptions come to wake you up, to shift your focus, to remind you that you are not the author of your own story. God is. He writes in ways you wouldn't write, but when you look back, His words make more sense than your entire plan ever could. Faith is not just trusting God's power, it's trusting His pace. It's accepting that sometimes He will slow you down so that something greater can catch up. Divine interruptions aren't always loud. Sometimes they come quietly, like a whisper that changes your direction. You might lose one thing and gain clarity. You might face rejection and find redirection. God doesn't waste movement. Even when it looks like chaos, heaven is orchestrating something precise. Every interruption carries an invitation to pause, to listen, to realign. When you're interrupted, ask not, why now? But what now? What is God trying to show me? What shift is He making in me? Because divine interruptions are not just about changing your situation, they're about changing your spirit. They test your willingness to yield, your ability to trust, your readiness to release control. You can't be used by God while still insisting on your own way. Sometimes He has to stop you in order to send you. Imagine how many miracles we miss because we treat interruptions as annoyances instead of appointments. We hurry past the person who needed our kindness because we were late. We complain about the delay that kept us from danger. We resist the season of stillness that was meant to reset our soul. But God's grace often hides behind what we call inconvenience. What feels like disruption is usually divine protection, wearing everyday clothes. When God interrupts your plan, it's not to punish you, it's to reposition you. He sees where your steps were heading and gently, or sometimes forcefully, redirects them toward destiny. The sudden change, the unexpected move, the moment that left you questioning everything, those are often the precise moments heaven whispered, now. Because when God is ready to shift your story, He doesn't ask your calendar for permission. There is beauty in learning to live interruptible. To say, God, I may not understand this, but I trust you enough to let you rearrange my day, my plans, my path. That's real faith, not control, but consent. It's waking up each morning saying, interrupt me if you must, move me if you will, I am available. Because miracles don't happen through people who have perfect plans, they happen through people who have open hearts. Sometimes divine interruptions come through storms. The plans you made fall apart, the people you relied on walk away, the stability you had vanishes overnight. It feels like destruction, but it's often the clearing before construction. God removes what cannot carry the next blessing. He tears down what's weak so He can rebuild what's strong. And in that breaking, you find breakthrough. In that interruption, you find intimacy with Him that you never had when life was predictable. Other times, divine interruptions come through blessings that feel too big for you. You thought you were unqualified, but suddenly the opportunity arrives. You thought you weren't ready, but suddenly the door opens. It doesn't make sense because miracles rarely do. God's timing will never wait for your comfort zone. When He calls, He expects your faith to answer, not your logic. That's why divine interruptions are so powerful. They bypass the limits of what you planned and introduce you to what God purposed. In divine interruptions, you learn that obedience matters more than understanding. God doesn't owe you explanations. He offers invitations. Every time he interrupts, it's a call to deeper trust. You may not know what's next, but you know who's guiding. You may not see the path, but you feel the peace that says go. And when peace leads, miracles follow. There's something sacred about the space between what you expected and what actually happens. That's where God's fingerprints are most visible. It's in the missed opportunity that led to a better one. It's in the closed chapter that made room for a new story. It's in the pause that made you pray, in the detour that made you depend, in the heartbreak that made you hear. Those are not random interruptions. They are divine redirections. God will often interrupt your routine to remind you of your reason. You weren't created just to perform tasks or follow timetables. You were created to fulfill purpose. But purpose requires flexibility. It demands that you hold your plans loosely so God can mold them freely. If you cling too tightly to what you scheduled, you might miss what He's sending. That's why sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is stop, breathe, and say, Lord, what are you saying right now? Divine interruptions can be uncomfortable because they strip you of predictability. But that discomfort is the soil where growth begins. It's where your dependence deepens. It's where you discover that God's surprises are always superior to your strategies. When He interrupts, He's not taking something from you. He's making space for something better. Think of every story of transformation. None of them began with comfort. Abraham was told to leave his home. Joseph's dreams led him into prison before the palace. Ruth's loss led her to legacy. Every one of them experienced divine interruption, and every one of them discovered that miracles don't come according to human schedules. They arrive according to heavenly strategy. God doesn't rush, but He never misses. He interrupts precisely when the shift must happen, when your heart is finally soft enough to hear and strong enough to obey. Divine interruptions carry divine instructions. When you're stopped, don't panic, listen. When plans fall apart, don't complain, pay attention. God may be whispering a new assignment, revealing a new direction, or pruning something that no longer serves your destiny. The interruption is not random, it's revelation in disguise. It's God turning your steps towards something you wouldn't have chosen but desperately need. There is a rhythm to divine interruptions, and once you recognize it, you stop fighting them. You begin to see the beauty in being interrupted by grace. You begin to thank God for every door that closed, every delay that confused, every detour that forced you to trust, because those weren't obstacles, they were orchestration. They were God's way of pulling you into His timing, His protection, His plan. Expect divine interruptions, because miracles rarely fit schedules. God's plans won't always align with your planner, but they will always align with your purpose. What feels like a pause might be preparation. What seems like an ending might be an entrance. What looks like chaos might be creation unfolding in perfect order. So live with open hands and a listening heart, because the moment heaven interrupts, everything that seemed ordinary can suddenly become extraordinary. Faith turns an ordinary moment into a turning point. There are moments in life that look like nothing special. You wake up, go about your routine, breathe the same air, walk the same roads, meet the same faces, and think it's just another day. But faith has a way of taking what looks common and transforming it into the birthplace of change. Faith does not need fireworks or signs in the sky to move. It needs only a willing heart, one breath of belief, one decision to trust when nothing looks different. Faith turns a simple step into a shift, a whisper into a breakthrough, an ordinary moment into a holy turning point. Faith is not a feeling. It's not about excitement or visible assurance. Faith is quiet power, a sacred conviction that moves beneath the surface. It's what keeps you walking when sight gives up. It's what holds your heart steady when logic shakes. Faith doesn't wait for proof, it becomes the proof. It's the unseen anchor that turns uncertainty into opportunity. Because when you believe, heaven begins to move in your direction. God responds not to perfection, but to faith. Even the smallest seed of belief can move what mountains of fear could not. Think about it. Every miracle begins with an ordinary moment. The widow pouring her last drop of oil, the man stretching his withered hand, the woman touching the hem of a garment, the fisherman casting his net one more time after a night of failure. None of those moments looked miraculous. They looked mundane, yet faith made them turning points. Faith doesn't wait for ideal conditions, it creates them. It doesn't need a spotlight, it needs surrender. It doesn't depend on circumstances, it declares them changed before they change. Faith begins where sight ends. When your eyes see only emptiness, but your spirit says, keep going, that's faith. When your heart is tired but you choose to hope again, that's faith. When doors close and you still believe that God's plan remains, that's faith. And in that moment, something sacred happens. The invisible starts shaping the visible. Heaven bends toward the believer. Miracles start forming in the unseen. Because faith is not passive waiting. It's active trusting. It says, even here, even now, I know God is working. Every turning point in life begins with a moment of faith disguised as risk. You never know when the decision you make in faith will become the hinge that shifts your entire story. The day you choose to forgive, the day you decide to start again, the day you pray even though your heart feels heavy. Those aren't small actions. They are sacred declarations that say, I believe there's more than what I see. And heaven always honors that. Because faith is the bridge between your now and your next. Faith doesn't erase struggle, but it changes how you walk through it. When faith enters a moment, fear loses its power. Doubt may still whisper, but it cannot command. Faith doesn't need the storm to stop. It simply trusts the one who walks on water. It knows that God doesn't need calm seas to prove he's in control. He can use the chaos to reveal his glory. So, when faith takes hold, even your challenges become instruments of purpose. What was meant to break you becomes the very place where you are built. What was meant to delay you becomes the platform for divine acceleration. Sometimes faith is not loud. It's not shouting scriptures or standing on mountains. Sometimes it's the trembling whisper that says, God, I still trust you. It's the tear that falls while still lifting your hands. It's the courage to take one more step when you'd rather sit down and quit. That's the faith that moves heaven, the kind that turns the smallest act of obedience into a turning point of destiny. Because God doesn't need much, He needs your yes. He needs your willingness to move even when the road isn't clear. An ordinary moment becomes extraordinary the instant you decide to see it through the eyes of faith. You can stand in the same place as before and see something completely different. What looked like limitation now looks like preparation. What felt like loss now feels like learning. Faith shifts perception before it shifts position. It changes how you see yourself, how you see others, and how you see God. When faith enters your perspective, despair gives way to purpose. You stop asking, why is this happening? And start asking, what is God doing through this? The power of faith is that it redefines what's possible. It takes the word impossible and hears, I'm possible. It sees beyond the immediate into the eternal. Faith doesn't live inside boundaries, it breaks them. It doesn't accept limits, it transcends them. That's why the enemy attacks your faith first. If he can make you doubt what God said, he can keep you from stepping into what God planned. But when you hold on to faith, you're holding on to heaven's promise, even when earth's evidence is missing. Faith doesn't need a crowd to be real. Some of the greatest acts of faith happen in private, in silent rooms, in sleepless nights, in whispered prayers. You may never see applause for your belief, but heaven records it all. Every time you choose faith over fear, you realign your story with divine order. Every time you trust in uncertainty, you make room for God to reveal His certainty. Faith doesn't change who God is. It changes how much of Him you allow into your situation. When faith meets obedience, miracles begin. Because belief without action is imagination, but faith with action is transformation. You don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step. That first step of faith is where the turning point begins. When you act on what you believe instead of what you see, you invite the supernatural into the natural. You give heaven permission to invade your reality. Sometimes faith will ask you to look foolish. It will ask you to build an ark when there's no rain, to praise before the victory, to sow when it looks barren, to walk away when it feels safer to stay. But every act of faith carries divine consequence. God doesn't call you to comfort. He calls you to courage. And when you respond, that moment becomes sacred. That moment becomes the hinge upon which your future swings. Faith teaches you that timing is not everything trust is. Even when nothing changes around you, something changes within you the moment you believe. Because faith doesn't start when circumstances shift. It starts when your spirit does. You begin to walk differently. You speak differently. You think differently. You stop saying, I can't, and start saying, God can. And that single shift in language becomes the birthplace of transformation. Ordinary moments are the canvas of the miraculous. God paints on simplicity with strokes of faith. A prayer whispered in the kitchen, a tear shed in the car, a sigh released in exhaustion. Each of these moments can become turning points when faith enters them. Because faith sanctifies the simple. It makes the natural sacred. It takes what looks like routine and turns it into revelation. You may not feel powerful, but faith inside you carries the weight of eternity. It doesn't depend on your strength, it depends on God's character. When you believe, you align yourself with His promise. You place your heart in agreement with heaven's plan. That alignment releases favor. It opens doors no one can close. It turns waiting rooms into classrooms. It turns valleys into stages. Because faith is not just about getting you out of something, it's about growing something within you. Faith turns the unseen into evidence. You may not see the full picture, but faith gives you confidence that the artist is still painting. You may not see the seed growing, but faith assures you that the roots are strengthening. You may not see progress, but faith teaches you that silence does not mean absence. When faith fills your heart, you stop measuring results by sight and start trusting the process by spirit. There's power in realizing that your greatest turning points may not come with announcement. They may come in the quiet moment when you choose to believe again after disappointment. They may come when you forgive someone who never apologized. They may come when you decide to pray instead of panic. Those moments look small, but heaven sees them as monumental. Faith transforms the ordinary choice into eternal consequence. The secret of faith is that it makes every moment meaningful. You begin to see purpose in pain, lessons in loss, direction in detours. Faith gives you vision beyond what's visible. It helps you walk through darkness knowing light is ahead, even if you can't yet see it. It helps you stand in storms and still say, "Peace, be still," because you know who commands the winds. That assurance doesn't remove the storm, it redefines it. It turns fear into fuel. Faith also transforms how you respond to delay. When you live by sight, delay feels like denial. But when you live by faith, delay becomes development. You learn patience, perseverance, and dependence. You realize that God's pace is not punishment, it's preparation. Faith turns waiting into worship. It takes frustration and turns it into formation. You start to understand that what God is doing in you is greater than what you're waiting for outside you. Every great story has a moment of faith that changed everything. The moment someone chose to believe when belief made no sense. That one decision separated history from destiny. That's the quiet power of faith. It doesn't always roar, but it always roots. It anchors your soul when everything else is shaking. It keeps you steady when the winds of life howl around you, and that stillness becomes your strength. Faith is not a magic trick, it's a mindset. It's a lens that lets you see life through divine perspective. It helps you find beauty in brokenness, meaning in mystery, and peace in uncertainty. It takes what looks like defeat and reframes it as destiny. It doesn't deny reality, it declares that God is greater than reality. It's the courage to stand firm in promises that haven't yet manifested. It's the confidence to say, even if it doesn't happen how I imagined, I still believe it will happen how God intended. When faith fills a moment, it changes its weight. What once felt like emptiness becomes expectation. What once felt like loss becomes possibility. Because faith is the power that awakens what's sleeping inside you. It calls your potential to attention. It tells your purpose to rise. It reminds your soul that there is still more ahead, still more to see, still more to become. Faith doesn't remove the ordinary. It reveals the divine hidden within it. It makes you realize that heaven has always been near, that every breath carries the possibility of breakthrough, that every choice carries the seed of change. What separates an ordinary day from a turning point is not the circumstances, it's your belief. The moment you decide to see God in the middle of your routine, the routine becomes revelation. The moment you trust Him in the midst of your struggle, the struggle becomes sacred ground. Faith turns an ordinary moment into a turning point because it invites the eternal into the temporary. It welcomes the supernatural into the simple. It transforms your life not by changing where you are, but by changing how you see where you are. And when your perspective changes, your path begins to shift. What once felt like a dead end starts to look like a doorway. What once felt like weakness begins to feel like awakening. Because faith, even the size of a mustard seed, is enough to make heaven move in the direction of your belief. When God marks a day, your purpose steps into motion. There are days that look like every other day, days that rise quietly, without warning or announcement. You open your eyes, stretch your hands, take a breath, and the world feels the same. The sky is no brighter, the air no different, the sounds no louder. Yet somewhere in the unseen, heaven has already drawn a circle around that date. God has whispered to time, this one is set apart. It might not look special, but eternity knows something is shifting. When God marks a day, everything in your life begins to respond to that divine signal. People move, paths open, hearts stir, and what was once still begins to come alive. It's as if heaven presses play on a story that's been waiting in pause. God marks days not according to the calendar of men, but according to the calendar of purpose. What feels like coincidence to you is coordination to Him. You may not realize it at first, but every marked day carries divine weight. It's the day when what was planted in faith begins to rise in manifestation. It's when what you prayed in secret starts to echo in the open. You don't get to choose when it happens, but when God decides the time, nothing can stop it, because when He marks a day, no delay can deny it, and no obstacle can override it. Heaven begins to align everything in creation to bring your purpose into motion. Sometimes you sense it before you see it. You wake up with an unusual peace or a strange stirring in your spirit. Something in you whispers that today feels different, even though nothing visible has changed. That's the vibration of destiny beginning to move. God marks moments not with noise, but with knowing. Your spirit feels the shift before your eyes do. The earth may look the same, but the atmosphere is different. God's hand has touched time itself and said, now. And in that now, everything dormant in your life begins to awaken. When God marks a day, what was once delayed starts accelerating. The prayers you thought were forgotten start finding their answers. The doors that resisted you begin to open effortlessly. You realize it's not about how strong you were or how hard you tried. It's about divine timing. God had already written this moment into your story before you even knew to pray for it. His plan was never late. It was simply waiting for its appointed hour. And when that hour comes, everything that's been out of order begins to align like stars, finding their place in the night sky. You can't force a marked day into being. You can't manufacture divine timing through effort or ambition. What you can do is remain faithful while you wait, because the waiting is not wasted. It's where God prepares you for what He's prepared for you. If your purpose started before you were ready, you would mistake pressure for punishment. But God waits until your faith matures, until your character can carry what your calling requires. Then, and only then, does He mark the moment. You'll think it came suddenly, but heaven has been building toward it all along. When God marks a day, even your enemies become instruments. The people who doubted you, the moments that broke you, the seasons that humbled you, they all start to make sense. Every hurt becomes harvest. Every setback becomes setup. Every tear becomes testimony. Because when purpose steps into motion, pain becomes the path. God wastes nothing. What once seemed like random suffering reveals itself as strategic shaping. Every experience you endured was designed to make you ready for the day God already marked. You can't recognize a marked day until you've walked through days that felt meaningless. The ordinary seasons teach you faithfulness. The waiting seasons teach you patience. The dry seasons teach you trust. And then suddenly, without warning, the very things that felt stagnant begin to move. Opportunities arrive out of nowhere. Conversations open doors you didn't knock on. You find yourself in the right place at the right time, not by accident, but by alignment. Because when God marks a day, even your steps are orchestrated. He makes sure you're standing in the exact position to receive what's been waiting for you. Sometimes the day God marks for you doesn't look like blessing. At first, it looks like breaking. You lose something you thought you couldn't live without. You face a challenge you didn't expect. You walk through a door that leads you into uncertainty. But the breaking is often the beginning. God uses what feels like collapse to create capacity. He removes what cannot carry the next season so that when purpose begins to move, there's room for it to grow. The pain you feel on that marked day may not be punishment, it may be birth. Every birth comes with pain, but it also comes with promise. When God marks a day, time itself becomes sacred. The minutes you used to overlook become meaningful. You start to sense that you are not just existing, you are being guided. Every conversation, every encounter, every pause feels pregnant with purpose. That's how you know the hand of God is on the clock. He's weaving moments together with invisible thread. What you thought was random is revealed to be written. Your purpose, long quiet and unseen, begins to make noise. It begins to demand movement. There's a rhythm in divine timing, and when the marked day arrives, you find yourself moving in sync with it without even realizing. You speak words that open doors. You take steps that lead to destiny. You meet people who carry keys to your next chapter. Nothing feels forced, it all flows. That's how you know the hand of God is behind it. When He marks a day, your striving stops and your surrender begins to work. Things that once felt heavy now move easily because grace is doing the lifting. A marked day doesn't always look miraculous to outsiders. It may not make headlines, but it shifts your entire spiritual landscape. It could be a day when you finally let go of what's been holding you back, a day when you forgive the one who hurt you, a day when you decide to trust again, to try again, to believe again. These moments may not be visible miracles, but they are eternal movements, because the moment your purpose starts moving inside you, heaven starts expanding around you. Sometimes the day God marks for you will require courage to step into. He will call you to leave familiar places, comfortable patterns, and predictable rhythms. The marked day is not always the easiest. It's often the beginning of elevation, and elevation always demands separation. You can't take everyone or everything with you into the next season. God marks a day to draw a line between who you were and who you're becoming. The transition may feel uncomfortable, but transformation always does. When purpose steps into motion, old seasons lose their power. The things that used to distract you no longer hold your attention. The fears that once controlled you lose their voice. You start moving differently, not faster, but with intention. You stop chasing things that don't align with destiny. You start saying no to noise and yes to peace. Because when God marks a day, your spirit begins to recognize what truly matters. You realize that purpose isn't about achievement, it's about assignment. You're not chasing success, you're following significance. Every marked day is a divine reminder that your story is not random. Even when you felt forgotten, heaven was planning your unveiling. The reason it took time is because destiny cannot be rushed. God had to make sure the stage was ready, the people were positioned, and the atmosphere was aligned. When everything is in place, He gives the signal. Suddenly, favor finds you. Suddenly, opportunity opens. Suddenly, your name is spoken in rooms you've never entered. But it's not sudden to God, it's scheduled. He's been waiting for this very day to activate what He placed inside you before the foundation of the world. The beauty of a marked day is that it doesn't depend on human permission. No one can block what God has appointed. When the time comes, even resistance becomes resource. The very thing that tried to stop you will push you forward. Because when purpose is in motion, everything serves it. Even opposition bows to divine order. You won't have to fight for validation. Purpose will speak for you. You won't have to chase platforms. Destiny will create them beneath your feet. Sometimes you won't realize it's a marked day until you look back. You'll remember that conversation that didn't seem important but shifted your direction. You'll recall that moment of stillness that birthed a new idea. You'll see how everything that happened that day carried a quiet miracle. That's the beauty of divine timing. It reveals itself in hindsight. You see how perfectly everything had to happen exactly when it did. You realize that even the waiting, the wandering, the weeping, all of it was leading to this day. When God marks a day, time bows to purpose. The seconds stretch, the hours expand, and everything that seemed delayed catches up. It's as if heaven redeems the time you thought was lost. Years of waiting can be reversed in one day of divine favor. That's how powerful God's timing is. It doesn't just move forward, it restores. It gathers every wasted season and turns it into strength. It collects every tear and turns it into testimony. It rewrites the meaning of your past by revealing what it was preparing you for. On a marked day, you begin to realize that you were never behind. You were never forgotten. You were right on time, just not on your time. God was orchestrating everything quietly, waiting for the moment your heart, your circumstances, and His plan aligned perfectly. And when that alignment happens, purpose begins to flow like a river that cannot be stopped. You find yourself doing what once seemed impossible, saying what once scared you, becoming who you were always meant to be. Marked days are heaven's punctuation in the story of your life. They are the commas between seasons, the turning pages between chapters. They remind you that your life is being written by a hand far wiser than your own. And though you may not understand every pause or every plot twist, you can trust that when God marks a day, everything changes not by accident, but by appointment. When purpose steps into motion, it doesn't always come with thunder, it often comes with peace. You feel a stillness that tells you something has shifted. You can't explain it, but you know it. You know that whatever was stuck has started to move, that whatever was lost is being restored, that whatever was unclear is becoming visible, because when God marks a day, His will begins to unfold in layers quietly, beautifully, inevitably. And all you can do is stand in awe as what once was promised begins to take form before your eyes.